These two bougie brothers, right, who are psychologists or psychiatrists, always get them mixed up, but they're real elitists, they're very well spoken, ultra cultured and all this stuff, and they have this dad who's an Irish, down-to-earth, retired cop. You know, and it's like they are so day and night that it's hilarious all on its own. Everything about Frasier and his brother Niles is kind of up here. You have to listen and catch the joke, but it is hilarious when you catch it. On this particular episode, they decided that they were going to go into business together, right? And so they're conducting this group session, but they're so arrogant and elitist that they're kind of competing with each other to show who's the greatest psychiatrist. And at one point, they go out in the hall and they just start arguing. And the group session gets up and sneaks out because it's like the doctors are falling apart. What in the world? And the senior psychiatrist comes out and goes, "Come into my office." And he starts talking to them and they're bickering. And he says, "I've never seen anything like this before in my life." And they're like, "What? What's the problem?" And then he says to them, he diagnoses and he says, "You know what the problem is? You two have a foundational," what word did I say? Mistrust. And he puts them into an exercise. He says, we're going to use one of the most basic exercises any psychiatrist will use. And he puts this step. He says, "Step up on here, Niles." He says, "And Frasier, get behind him, and you fall back, Niles, and Frasier will catch you." You've all heard this, right? If you trust somebody, you should be able to fall back and they catch you. Well, this is what happens when they get up there. Niles is standing up on a little step, and Frasier's back there, and Niles decides, "I'm ready to fall." And he starts to go back, and he looks at the psychiatrist and says, "Is he in place?" And the psychiatrist goes, "Yes, just fall." So then he stands up again, and he starts to fall back, and he jumps, he goes, Are his hands out?" And he says, "Yes, just fall." So it goes on like this, and then finally, Frasier says, "Forget it, Niles," and he says, "I'll fall." And he gets up on the step, and he decides, "Okay, I trust you, and I'll fall." Only for Frasier to get on the step, and what do you think he did? The same. He said, "Is he in place?" And so the doctor says, "You see?" And finally, this is the part that cracks me up because the doctor says, "It's a simple exercise," and he gets up on the step. He says, "You get on the step and you just fall." Bam! And the man hits the ground because neither Frasier or Niles was paying attention. And as I read Hebrews 4, God said, that's how y'all act. I went to the cross and I saved you. I let them put thorns on my head. They pierced me in my hand. They poked me in my side. They whipped me on my back. You can trust me. And we go, "Oh Lord, are you back there? Bring your tithes and your offering to the church, and I'll rebuke the devourer for your sake. I'll open up the windows of heaven on you. Are your hands in place?"
Thank you, Jesus.
God said our struggles are because we have a foundational mistrust.
Yes.
It's in my word, but you don't believe it. And in that first verse, he said there remains a promise to those who are yet to enter into his rest. He says, look at verse 2. "For indeed the gospel," talking about the same Bible y'all read, the same thing you hear, the same Jesus, the same Messiah, the same Yeshua, was preached to them. But because it was not mixed with faith, it didn't profit them. And God is saying over 5,000, see we always hear 2, but over 5,000 years ago, because we're going back beyond Jesus, back to when the Israelites were out there and I had called them out of Egypt. He said, I prophetically told them about Yeshua, the Messiah, the anointed one, the Christ, who would come and would redeem them from their sins, who would save them and rescue them from death. But they didn't believe me. They would start to believe me and then they would jump back up because somehow my word didn't mix with faith, and they couldn't believe me. He said, but then 5,000 years later, I let my son go to a cross, right? He says, and here you guys are over 2,000 years after that, and the work is finished, and y'all still standing on the step going, are your hands in place? Will you really watch out for me? I'm going to get evicted from my apartment. They're going to fire me. My spouse is going to leave me. God said, because there's a foundational mistrust. But your job is this today. Your job is that you mix faith with what you hear. Because until you mix your faith, it will profit you nothing. You continue to stand on the steps, wanting to fall, wanting to cast your cares on him, wanting to believe, wanting to give tithes and offerings, wanting to sell out to him, wanting to believe everything he says is true, but somehow never doing it because you don't really believe. And so I'm going to walk you through this thing so that you can believe like me that it is finished. Jesus said it on the cross. The Bible says that when he hung there, he suffered, he bled, he died, he was tortured. He fulfilled the law. He did everything he was supposed to do and said, and when it came to the last, he said, now give me something to drink. And they gave him vinegar, which is also symbolic. And when it was received, he said, now it is finished. And the Bible said he didn't just die. They didn't kill him. It didn't just happen. But when he recognized that everything was finished, he gave up the ghost. And so it is finished. And so it says here that when you hear the gospel, unless you mix faith with it, it doesn't profit you at all. But listen to this. He says, for he who has believed do enter the rest. How many of you want to rest? How many of you want to stop wondering how things are going to happen and why things happen? How many people want to stop having to ask God? Joyce Meyer said, why God, why? When God, when? Right? Yesterday we heard a man preach a phenomenal service. He said that none of them questions ought to be the question of the believer. He said the believer ought to only ask who? And the answer is Jesus. And if Jesus is the answer, you ought to be able to rest in it. And so it says here for us that we can only enter this rest if we believe. But look at this. He says, so I swore in verse 3, for he who has believed do enter the rest. When we add our faith, which is the only thing we can give God, that's why Hebrews 11 says, it is impossible to please God without faith. God is saying, listen, there ain't nothing you can do for me. I'm the door, you're the believer. I'm the door, you're the rester. I'm the worker, I'm the provider. I thought about that this morning as I was praying. I said, God, you are so phenomenal. When we ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, I'm telling y'all, we messed up.
Yes.
Somebody said, no, Adam and Eve ate and we just punished. No, but every day that you hear and won't believe you're eating of the knowledge of good and evil. Because you're trying to make the decision for yourself. Did he really mean what he said? Will it really happen for me? That's the knowledge of good and evil. You're trying to decide. But God said, my word is true. It stands on its own. What I speak is true. I'm not a man that I should lie. And what I speak must be accomplished. It can't even come back to me unfulfilled. And that's why 5,000 years later, I'm still telling you there remains a promise of rest. Because I sent it out. That if you would believe me, you would rest. And so what he said here in the second part of verse 3, he said, I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. And right there, I'm like, God, you know, sometimes the way they used to write is confusing. You're telling me there's a promise of rest, and then you're talking about something, I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter. He said, but read closely. See, because y'all read with backward eyes. Y'all read with eyes of what you heard somebody else say. You don't go to the word and prove it for yourself. You don't read the whole context. You've been taught to read above and below and get the context, but you just pick it out and you run. I heard somebody preach it and I run with it. You don't verify it. He said if you would read it, you would see that I first said, whoever believes, they enter my rest. But they who? They in the chapter before. They who? They, those Israelites. They who? They who are brought out of bondage. They who? They who live by the law. They who think they still can work it out. They who think they still ought to be eating of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil and making the decision for themselves. They won't enter my rest. You ever realize that God never called us doers, but he called us believers? He didn't call us deciders, but he called us believers. God says over and over and over, believers. You got to be a believer and you'll enter my rest. If you deem yourself anything other than one who believes the word of God, you will always be in turmoil. How am I going to pay my college bill? How am I going to pay my house bill? How am I going to pay my car bill? How am I going to pay my alimony? How am I going to pay my child support? Because you're out there working and laboring instead of believing that I am Jehovah Jireh, the one who provides. And let me tell you something about that. When I was a teenager, somebody taught me Jehovah Jireh, the one who provides. And that's how I took it. Got about my mid-20s, went and heard this great preacher, and he was a little bit scholarly, and he said something about seeing. And so I said, And so then I picked up, I was like, wow, it's the God who sees and provides. Y'all heard me say that, right? Only to find a new resource lately, and I read it in the Hebrew for myself. See, I don't read Hebrew, but I've been learning the Hebrew letters. Read it for myself, and guess what it says? Jehovah Jireh is the one who will see to the provision. Now he just sees it. Now he'll just provide. But whatever it takes, he will see to it that the provision is met. Is that provide? Which allows me once again to become a what? A believer. Because it's already finished. I can rest in it. He's already declared that whatever it takes, I will make it happen. So you working your second job and begging people, can they loan you the money? And crying to people because you don't see the end of it. But he's the one who will see to the provision. If it doesn't get fulfilled, guess what? Remember when the children of Israel were coming out and God got angry with them, right? Because remember, wasn't no mercy, wasn't no grace going on in the Old Testament, right? God was like an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So they were getting on God's nerves, and God is like, this is it. I'm getting ready to wipe them out. And Moses said, stay your anger, Lord. Lest the heathen say, you brought us out here and killed us. Lest the heathen say their God couldn't provide for them. Now, if in the Old Testament they understood that, don't let us down because it'll be a bad rep on you. How much more after he has given his son? Remember when the Bible said if he'll give his son, will he not freely give you all things? Yes. I heard someone talking the other day, and they were just having a conversation, and this is what came out. If God would not give me something that is good for me or that I need, God, in essence, is saying that thing is more valuable than Jesus. Get that? Get that. Listen to this. I give you my son, but I won't give you money to pay your bills. He just said money was bigger than Jesus. I'll give you my son, but I won't give you healthy relationships. He just said relationship is bigger than Jesus. You get it? I still see confusion on your face. I will let my son be tortured and beaten and pierced and whipped and mocked and spit on. This is the most valuable thing I have is my son, because I am him and he is me and I'm in him and he's in me. I would give you that, but I won't give you a house to live in. You be homeless. What in the world is more valuable than Jesus? And so he said, if I would give you my son, don't let the devil trick you, or don't let religion trick you into thinking there is anything that I wouldn't give you because I already gave you the best. It is finished. Rest in it.